Chapter 86. All Hail the Conquerors.
What did I miss?
Prey's return was not sudden and dramatic. Sudden, certainly, but on the scale of national heroes and the defeat of Discord, not dramatic. All Night Guard patrols had been on the lookout for him, but there were no actual search parties to recall. Princess Luna would be made aware, but as part of Nighthawk's daily report, first she hadn't given instructions to be informed immediately. Questions about where Prey had been for nearly 3 days would definitely be asked, but only later when this current crisis was sufficiently dealt with. To the Thestrals of the Night Guard, Prey was simply one of their number. The youngest member certainly, but still first a Night Guard, then a child second, and duty always came before all else. Besides which, outside of the Night Guard, there were precious few who even knew Prey existed. No, Prey's return wasn't shockingly dramatic. Not even that important in the grand scheme of things. Canterlot didn't care. The world isn't fair, and the day carried on. To a few, though, those limited few, they did care, and Prey's return was incredibly important to them. Joy. Elated relief. First Gloom and Crimson, later would come the others. All that waiting, that worrying, that holding out on dwindling hope while trying to keep the rising doubts at bay, it had all paid off in the end, because it had somehow worked. Prey had come back unharmed. What did you miss? What did you miss? What? All the paperwork, but who cares? You're alive! You're back! The exhaustion seemed to have slid off of Gloom's shoulders like a duck shedding water as he'd spoken. Crimson's wings had almost spread wide on their own accord as he nearly lunged over to Prey. I knew it. I knew it. I knew you would come back. You knew, I knew you wouldn't just leave us like that. Gloom's hooves had twitched, his wing claws flexing, instinctively waiting to draw the small lamb into a relieved embrace, and only just refraining. His fangs shone in a huge grin he wasn't able to stop, even if he wanted to try. Did you only just get back from wherever you were? How did you only get back just now, by the way? As for, where did your tracer bands go? That question could come later. And anyway, those bands hadn't ever been needed in Gloom's opinion, and since Prey had returned completely of his own volition, it just cemented his point. The lamb's smile shrank a bit.
Ah, that.
He scuffed a cloven hoof on the floorboards.
In one word, Discord.
The name was a lance through the buoyancy of their joy. Crimson's wings flexed, his wing blades whispering in their sheaths. Did he get to you personally? Everyone personally knew at least someone who had ended up Discord touched, twisted into a perverse reflection of themselves before the elements of harmony had fixed everything. Prey nodded.
You know how the elements of harmony undid everything? Well, apparently that doesn't include undoing where you ended up, like where Discord teleported me. Without any money, it's taken me this long to travel back.
That obviously wasn't all of it. Prey's short story was lacking in all the details, but neither Gloom nor Crimson even considered asking. Asking what Discord had twisted Prey into against his will wasn't something they needed to know if Prey didn't want to share. But that was in the past. Prey was back and healthy, and now all the worry and fear was over. All the rest could wait for later, or forever even. At that thought, the smile pushed its way firmly back onto Gloom's face again. He bent down to Prey's eye level, still grinning like a loon under his helmet and too happy to care. And behind him, his tail swishing and flicking, unable to stay still. I'm so glad you're back, Prey, and safe. I don't have the words, but I feel so, just so happy. Gloom laughed in delight at his own fumbling. Prey tilted his head, a huge matching smile of his own nearly creasing his blue eyes shut, it was so big. Thank you! Crimson was just as caught up in a choke of emotion, relief and delight. The laconic Pegasus all but prancing or more hovering in place as the positive energy washed through him. Crimson didn't say anything, but only because he couldn't seem to find words which would be enough. So he just grinned and vibrated in place. Even his normally creepy smile was just so jam-packed with happiness that it looked right. The white lamb laughed briefly, quietly.
Yeah, Gloom, Crimson, I'm back. Sorry for making you wait.
Then Lieutenant Screech burst upon the scene. having heard the news and rushed here to confirm their one MIA night guard really was unharmed. That, and because he too had been secretly fearing the worst. "Sergeant Gloom, I was told Pray! There you are! Praise be to Luna!" The last of them was back. The IS&D was finally back up to strength, or back up to the original trio, at least. A small thing on Canterlot's scale. A momentous thing by the scale of those who cared. But perhaps, if some secrets had been known, if the city had been more watchful and not caught up in post-celebrations, the return of one small runt lamb would have finally registered as much more important to Canterlot's future. And not some distant, vague, and far-off concept of the future either, but one much more immediate. Or perhaps, the moment was already past, and it was too late to change what was to come. Sooner or later, welcome or rejected, the future would come. Just because someone thought the worst was past, or that because something dreadful had already happened and the world would now grant them a reprieve, this wishful thinking wouldn't change anything. You might think you knew how things were supposed to go, and that you saw a pattern for the future, but no one can control the future. Unexpected or unwanted, the future was already breathing down your neck. It always was. Most just never realized that the future was only ever a breath away. Don't take that breath for granted. The sun rises, the sun sets, but everyone has to cross the river someday. And that day could be today. Canterlot as a whole was not aware. It had not been prepared for discord. Not that the city ever could have possibly been, because who even knew where the insane chaos chimera had come from? That old statue? No way. That couldn't have been the real Discord, just a historical recording. The princesses would never have overlooked something so obvious. But neither was Canterlot prepared for any further disaster. It was too fast, too soon. Only 3 days had passed. Maybe, if given a month or two, perhaps the governing bodies of Canterlot would, like a giant golden turtle, begin to implement some changes and safeguards against future magical apocalypses. Maybe, maybe not. But not right now, when Discord had only just fallen, and all was well with the world. The Knight and Royal Guard forces were all working overtime, trying to get everything back in order and under control, but they were only being reactionary. Look at them and their efforts. The Thestral and normal Pony Guard alike were doing good work, and achieving great things. But what the Guard forces weren't able to be was proactive. It was just the way of things. That, and they were looking outwards. It wasn't any individual's fault, just their fault as a whole. Canterlot was looking outwards. It didn't think to look inwards, to try seeing beyond what it thought to saw, to look beneath. Seemingly utterly unrelated to any of that, though, on the morning of the 3rd day after the defeat of Discord, a runt lamb with white wool and soft blue eyes quietly returned to the joy of those who knew him. Joy. Yes, joy. A pretentious word, and also a simple word. If asked to describe a rate, most people would understand the word joy to be of a higher state of happiness. Happiness, but just more in every aspect. Ponies themselves use the word joy fairly often. But yes, joy. It wasn't silly or exaggerated. It was simply real joy. Saffron Swirl hugged Lily, such was her feelings when she heard the disfigured mare squawking and trying to push off the glamour model. "Sergeant Gloom found him. Oh, and he's fine. Oh, I'm so happy for them. It would have just been too sad otherwise." Hey, watch my face. Don't bump the twigs," Lily grumbled, but not without cause. Roughly jarring the meldwood sprouting from her flesh hurt. She was smiling too, though, proud that Prey was back from whatever had gone wrong. Proud because he was IS&D, and she was also IS&D. Relieved because she needed Prey to be fine. For herself, nearly as much as for the tiny group of people she could still call her friends. After Mayflower, Lily couldn't let herself believe that anything less could break a member of the IS&D, because she needed to get well enough to be a member of the IS&D again. She had to. It was her goal, her focus. If she couldn't believe she could reach it, she'd break. Joy. More fleeting than happiness, harder to hold on to, with a nearly non-existent shelf life, but once tasted it was so incredibly hard to forget. To those who knew the depths of sorrow, they could understand the heights of joy better than anyone who had never suffered. It was about contrast. Gloom, Crimson, Scenic, Lily, Saffron, although not Carton Juice, they all had at least some measure of the perspective to understand that contrast. But honestly, it didn't need to be complicated. Someone who they had feared might be dead was alive. Why did it need to be any more complicated than that? It had been morning when Prey had returned to them, meaning a bit over halfway through a long, tiring shift. It certainly made for a much more lively second half. Taffy arrived in a whirlwind of bristling excitement, talking a mile a minute to express her happiness. Other night guards, although they were being run off their hooves, if they happened to be passing by, still stopped for the 10 or 20 seconds necessary to look in and confirm the good news for themselves. Not that they knew Prey personally, but rather as fellow night guards who knew Gloom. Cookie the cook served the lamb an extra big helping in the mess hall, and didn't even grouch at Gloom and Crimson for once. Everyone was happy, and why wouldn't they be? Good news was to be celebrated, especially after Discord's so recent defeat. Time still passed, however, and the shift finally came to an end. And to be honest, it had been a bit hard to focus on anything to do with paperwork. By then, the ecstatic joy had also finally faded, but it had been replaced by lingering warm happiness as the three of them left via the guard compound's gate. Gloom and Crimson hadn't suddenly been cured of their previous tiredness and hours of missed sleep, but both unanimously agreed simply splitting up and going back to their apartments was simply out of the question. There needed to be something further to round off this stressful and wonderful day. So they went and got milkshakes. Simple and quiet. Or it was quiet once they finally got their drinks and left the bustling parlor. Every pony and their dog was still riding high after Discord's defeat, and were still taking impromptu opportunities to spontaneously celebrate even now 3 days later, such as with ice cream and milkshakes. The IS&D left the noisy parlor behind and moved to a quiet spot. The sun was bright overhead, taking the brisk bite out of the air, as they stood undisturbed on a small street bridge overhanging a mostly forgotten water canal. This bridge was one of the few pony-designed but inevitable mistakes in Canterlot's street layout. Simply put, it had been built some time ago down here at this end of the street, instead of at the other end where ponies wouldn't have to detour down the whole street just to use it. At some point, enough ponies must have complained, because a newer hoof bridge had been installed to do just that where it should have been built in the first place. The poor planning didn't really matter to the IS&D though, just that it was quiet and less trodden. Gloom and Crimson stood at the bridge's edge, their milkshakes resting on the wide stone rail. The lamb of the hour sat atop the stone railing itself, for once equalizing the head height between them all. They sat, quietly watching the water of the old canal slowly flow into the shadow of the hoof bridge, occasionally sipping from their milkshakes. Mango for Gloom and Crimson, and Blueberry for their smaller woolly companion. The lamb hadn't finished the whole cup within the minute like he usually did, oddly enough. He was copying the two armored stallions in their pace instead. In hindsight, perhaps their non-gold guard armor might have had something to do with why not even one pony had passed across this bridge, not counting how out of the way it was. The sun was rather bright, but Gloom kept his eyes lowered, and it didn't really catch and sparkle on the water below, so he was okay. The air wasn't exactly warm, and they were drinking milkshakes, but the three of them were used to far colder. Every now and then, the water eddied and gurgled. It was a pleasant filter to the background sounds of street and city life wherever this happened. This right here, this was one of those moments. The ones where, in between the struggles of life, you were truly living.
What are we going to do if this ever happens again?
The lamb finally asked conversationally. There wasn't any clarification needed as to what this was. Gloom took a deep swallow from his now mostly gone milkshake. What can the three of us do? It took the 6 elements of harmony to defeat Discord. And set everything right afterwards. That was just as important, Crimson put in, leaning on the stone railing to watch a floating leaf pass on the water below. It was an important point worth reiterating, one which felt like it got overlooked. They knew this lesson well. After the fight, the damage, destruction, and death doesn't just go away. Win or lose, you still always lost something. Except the elements had also fixed the damage done. Imagine if all the chaos magic hadn't also been cleansed by harmony when it dealt with the Lord of Chaos.
Right. So what are we going to do? Because I am not happy with the way things went,
Prey said. His smile was airy, but his tone was dark. Prey hadn't told them exactly what had happened to him during the chaos. Neither had Gloom, nor had Crimson. Each of the three of them had only given a vague recounting to the others. None of them had pressed the matter with another. It wasn't needed. They didn't need to share it to be able to remember clearly the very real danger and dread, even if the rest of the city seemed to have forgotten those parts. Discord could have killed them all, if that's what he found amusing. And he would have, eventually, when he changed his twisted mind or thought it would be a laugh to turn Mount Cantor into a volcano. Gloom did not like that feeling of helpless powerlessness. And he imagined neither did the other two. The Reaper King, the Kinder Snatches, that dark, dark night. They'd been powerless then too, and their failure had meant the deaths of others. "There's nothing we can do. Realistically, I mean," Crimson stated bluntly and sourly. "I mean, Discord was too huge for us. We can't do anything to stop that." A bitter truth. They were just three. They didn't have any special powers like the princesses, or the element bearers. They were all part of the countless who had been useless. The whole of Canterlot put together hadn't stopped Discord. What would one undersized squad of night guards do against something like that in the future? Nothing. It was like the sleeping dragon all over again. They would just have been fodder if it had come to a battle. It was the moon-blighted truth. When such giants walked, all the worms frantically crawling around in the mud could do was try not to get stepped on.
I know that, Crimson.
Prey spoke up again into the unhappy silence which had fallen.
What I mean is, what are we, the three of us, going to do when the next big thing goes wrong? How are the three of us going to survive?
Gloom gave the lamb a sidelong look. "We're night guards. We'll be doing whatever we're ordered to do to help mitigate the disaster, even if it's only to help pick up the pieces afterwards." A Thestral's duty. But Prey was already shaking his head.
No, I don't mean like that. I mean...
He waved one cloven hoof in the air vaguely.
Like, sure, we'll do all of that. But what about in a disaster scenario? What I'm saying is, we should have a plan. Like, if Canterlot was overrun or something. If all is lost, we should have a place to meet.
Prey abruptly swiveled to look at both Gloom and Crimson.
Seriously, where should we meet? Just the three of us, tell no one else. We should have an emergency meeting point in the city, where we could find each other if we needed to.
"If that happened," Crimson said slowly, "would it not be better to flee out of Canterlot first?"
You two can fly out whenever you fancy. I can't. And in that case, you probably should. But let's set a place in case it isn't quite that bad, or we have to meet in secret. You never know what could happen.
Gloom supposed there was no harm, and it might save one of their lives in the future. He blinked tired, heavy eyes, and actually made himself seriously think about it. "Actually, I think I know a place. Do you remember on our first day off, we went into the market in Lower Canterlot? Do you remember where we met up afterwards?" Prey cocked his head, raising an eyebrow in question. Crimson nodded as he recalled.
"That alcove, the lone statue of Princess Luna."
"Yeah, that's the one. Remember it now, Prey? That's what I have in mind. Do you agree?" Gloom asked.
It'll do.
Prey nodded.
"I also agree,"
Crimson added. "So if, and I pray to Luna it never comes to that, but if something happens and we're separated and we have to meet again, that's where we'll go. Just the three of us," Gloom said.
Perfect.
Prey smiled.
I won't forget it.
The sourness over the topic they had discussed on the hoof bridge didn't linger past their conversation. Today was a good day. Today was a miraculous day, even. Today was midday, actually, and tonight they would need to be back at the palace to start their shift, rested and ready to go once again. There would be no day off for Prey's unexpected return. That meant finally bringing their day to a close and actually getting some sleep. The thought of the night guard sparked a thought in Gloom's head, one he had been subconsciously putting off. It had to do with Prey's missing tracer bands. Prey had obviously proved they weren't necessary, since he'd returned by himself, but the decision wasn't up to Gloom. This seemed a poor way to repay the trust which had been more than earned by now. Trust was supposed to be a two-way street. What would it say about the night guard if they couldn't extend that courtesy to some pony who had done so much in their duty? For that matter, Gloom wondered, what about Crimson? He was still forced to wear the tracer bands too. Would his hopefully be removed as well now that Preys were gone? Or would rather another pair of golden cuffs instead be slapped on Prey's hooves? Would Prey's probation restrictions force Nighthawk's hoof in the matter? Their sergeant tried not to let himself dwell on his disquiet, and told himself surely with all the goodwill going around, things would turn out for the best. Today was a good day. Hope and relief was in the air. Prey had returned to them safe and sound after all, or mostly anyway. His cutie mark had told him there had been something amiss in Prey's story, or rather that he felt Prey's route back to Canterlot hadn't been what the lamb had said it had been. It worried Gloom, but only as worry for Prey. He trusted Prey. His worry was that whatever Prey had decided to keep private might be something it would be healthier to share. Whether it be how he had lost the tracer bands in the first place, or what Discord had personally done to him, or what he'd been going to do when he got back to his family if the elements of harmony hadn't cleansed the chaos. His home village was the only destination Gloom could think of that someone like Discord might send Prey to. Although if that were the case, both he and Crimson were hypocrites too for not sharing. But Gloom chose to have faith in Prey, in Crimson, and in himself. There would be time to discuss things later, if they really had to. For today, life was good. So thinking, Gloom tiredly but contentedly bid Crimson and Prey a good day, a tiny disbelieving part of him still amazed that this wasn't a dream. He would see his two dear colleagues, friends, and companions later. Gloom wasn't used to having good days, where life gave back instead of taking for once, but today had been one of them. Crimson shut the front door behind him, leaving the short corridor to their two separate flats cast in a cool gloom. The shadow was pleasant on tired eyes after the brightness of the sun outside. The Pegasus paused, seeing the small lamp standing at the end of the hallway. He hadn't made to open his own door or go inside. Crimson tilted his head, one ear cocked in silent question. Prey blinked, returning from wherever he had been in his head.
Sorry, Crimson, did you say something?
No, I didn't. I was wondering. There was something I had been meaning to ask. Is now a good time, or should it wait?
That depends on what it's about, I suppose.
Prey shrugged thin shoulders. Crimson took a step closer, but not too close because he knew how much personal space meant to Prey.
While you were gone, someone came to your flat while I was out. A mare. And I think they went inside. Do you know who they were?
Crimson asked the question carefully, watching Prey for any reaction. He didn't ask about the unexplained access he himself also seemed to have into Prey's flat. Not yet. The lamb grimaced slightly.
Actually, now isn't a good time for that question. Can I answer it another time?
Crimson nodded, because of course Prey could. He might want to know, but he couldn't and wouldn't force his friend. His other question about Prey's door would have to wait too. But Crimson still wanted to ask something more. He felt the burning need to speak, even if just for a little longer. It was just the two of them standing in here.
What happened to your ribbon?
Prey's face didn't so much as flicker.
Oh, my ribbon. Don't worry about that.
Crimson blinked in obvious shock.
But it was your ribbon.
You don't need to worry about it. Seriously, don't worry. I didn't lose it. Rather, it'll turn up at some point.
Prey answered vaguely. That did not sit right with Crimson. Didn't that ribbon mean as much to Prey as Crimson's wing blades meant to him? Why was Prey denying his loss? Because he wanted to try and forget about it as quickly as possible? Or maybe Prey really did mean it, that the blue ribbon would somehow be returned to him. Crimson could believe something like that could mysteriously happen. Yet even so, it strongly did not sit right in Crimson. On impulse, the Pegasus drew in a deep breath. But no, there was only the scent of the two of them here. He knew Prey's familiar scent just as well as he knew Gloom's or his own because of his special talent.
Say, if I had a small request...
The lamb started suddenly, and then trailed off, rubbing one forehoof against the bare ankle of his other leg.
Ask away,
Crimson urged. Prey seemed to internally debate for a second longer, before simply giving in and unashamedly laying out his request.
I would prefer to sleep in the same room tonight. Well, it's not night, but you know what I mean. So, can I take the floor in your flat?
Not sleep in his own flat? Crimson was silent for a moment as he absorbed that. Many different thoughts danced behind his eyes. Prey went on.
There's a couple of reasons. I'd just prefer to be around someone else for a night. And I'd like to not be caught off guard and apart if something were to happen.
Is something going to happen?
Crimson asked, dead serious. The lamb simply shrugged wryly.
Who can know? Look at how Discord came out of nowhere. So while nothing should happen, Discord shouldn't have happened either. Nobody knows just what is going to come out of nowhere next.
There was something hiding beneath those words. However, it could have just been cynicism. But whatever the hidden meaning was or wasn't, Crimson's answer was the same.
Of course, Prey. Please, do come in.
Crimson let them into his flat. The curtains were open, and the overly bright sun streamed in. Shutting the makeshift blinds was the first thing Crimson did. Second was getting his spare blanket out of the cupboard, already neatly folded, and giving it to Prey. Crimson would have offered his bed without a second's hesitation, but he knew Prey would never share a bed no matter how tired the lamb might be. Crimson himself wasn't fond of contact, but with Prey it was at a completely different level of loathing. Gloom had muttered once before that he desperately hoped Prey at least still hugged his mother. Their sergeant had meant it with complete sincerity, too. It was another question which Crimson had that he also would not ask of Prey, but wait to be told. Prey had said he would take the floor. A normal pony host would have protested and argued, before finally giving in, since there was only one bed. Crimson didn't protest. If Prey hadn't wanted to sleep on the floor, he wouldn't have said he would take the floor. Crimson was tired. Finally back in his own flat, with the blinds drawn and the bed so close, tiredness was rapidly gaining on him. It could painfully be seen in the sloppiness to his posture and droop of his wings. Prey had already folded up the spare blanket in half and was curled up on his front, politely waiting for Crimson to divest himself of his armor and take the bed so he might say goodnight, or good day, or whatever. They only spoke of one further thing before Crimson lay down to finally sleep, a sleep where he finally didn't have to worry. Perhaps that was the real reason Prey had asked to sleep in here, for the Pegasus's peace of mind. Just for the first night as continued proof that he really was back and wasn't going to disappear once again. Crimson had just set down his sheathed wing blades at the foot of his bed, and was pulling himself wearily onto the mattress, so utterly ready for some dreamless rest, when the watching lamb said his last piece. He spoke quietly, thoughtfully, chin resting on a mound of the blankets set between his forehoofs comfortably as he watched Crimson. His ears were flopped out to each side, pushed back as to not end up inadvertently falling asleep atop one.
You said they were fine after Discord, but I doubt you've had any chance to visit them and make sure. I think I would like to see Scenic and Lily for myself. During the chaos, as I was lying there, I thought of them. Not just you and Gloom, but them too. And I hoped they were okay. I hadn't realized, but if something were to have happened to them, I'd miss them.
Crimson didn't say anything to that right away, letting those words settle first. He absently tugged the metal ring binding his lanky mane out, uncaring of the pinch in his haste and tiredness.
That's good, Prey. That's a good thing. I would too. I mean, it is just... Now that I do care, I don't want to try and not care anymore. It's cold and lonely. It feels so much better to care.
The Pegasi's last words were simply a murmur as his eyes drifted shut, sleep calming him with a vengeance. Maybe the prone lamb said the next words. Maybe he didn't. Maybe Crimson heard them, or maybe it was the flutterings of the first wing beats of dreams.
Lonely isn't cold. It's hungry.
There was only one further thing, but it was also a thing of no note, something to be forgotten. Crimson blearily opened one yellow eye, all he could manage. Half raising his head was too much effort.
Prey?
The lamb was standing below the covered window. He turned around quickly.
Nothing. Just checking the time of day. Don't worry, it's not time to get up.
The lamb whispered, moving quickly back towards his blankets. Had there been a voice? Just a pigeon at the window? Nothing but the bubblings of a rudely awakened mind. The red stallion messily let his head fall back to the pillow and returned to the bliss of sleep. Another day passed in Canterlot, or above Canterlot, or even from Canterlot, if you measured the day as the passage of the sun overhead and remembered who controlled it. Or controlled it once again, much to the relief of all. Discord was gone, banished, or destroyed. No one actually seemed to know the specifics, but obviously the princess had gotten rid of him for good now. Discord was gone and life was good! Every time you stepped out of your front door and looked up to the wonderful blue sky and breathed deeply of the bracing air, you just couldn't help it. You couldn't help getting willfully caught up in the swell of being alive all over again. A reminder not to take the order and harmony of the world for granted, and also a reason why harmony was so great, because just look at it. Look at it all. Look at the glorious city of Canterlot, which had been twisted beyond recognition not so long ago, but which was now perfect once again. Swinging shop signs, Pegasi swooping in and out, businesses and trades starting back up or kicking off with brand new opportunities, golden spires reflecting the sun, and the whole of Equestria spread out below the grandest pony city of the age, from here to the horizon. What wonder, and what a wonderful day! And for most, it was wonderful. But there was always sad stories out there. It is the contrast that makes the happy ones even happier. So long as you are not the one on the negative side of the contrast, that is. Then, it's even worse, because the reverse of the contrast is also just as true. All those happy stories made the sad ones even sadder. 1,000 ponies breathed in deeply of the free, purified air and gave thanks in their hearts to their sun princess and harmony once again. But somewhere in a hospital, or gathered around a bed in a family's house, or utterly alone, there would be those who drew their last breaths today. Harmony had come, the chaos had been purged, the elements had triumphed. But time never ceases. 1,000 stories, and then add one extra, because life is a tapestry of interwoven lives, and there is always another person's story running parallel to your own. Or, to be more accurate, more like 1,000 parallel stories. 1,000 happy stories, and then the one other story. Sudden sickness, or an unforeseen accident could strike out of nowhere with breathtaking savagery even on this, a wonderful day. And even if it didn't, old age will have its due in the end. Unless, of course, you were one of the immortal alicorns ruling this glorious golden city. Then even mortality was beneath you. Kings and queens came and went, but the princesses were forever. By dint of birthright, by dint of harmony-blessed talent, by dint of tradition and history. As long as the sun and moon rose and set, the alicorns would rule into unaging eternity. More specifically, they would be ruling from out of the highest building in the whole city, the royal palace. It was up at this marble pavilion of opulence that the most important decisions of government were made. It was also from within it, down on the lower levels of the palace, that the guards dedicated to protecting this wonderful city hung their banners and seated their captains. The gold and red of the Royal Guard, and the silver and indigo of the Night Guard. Captain Shining Armor, and Captain Nighthawk. It was rare for the two stallions to get along, and it had little to do with which of the two alicorns they were each first sworn to, and which one came second. A small part, yes, but not much. Mostly, it had to do with them both being strong-willed individuals, who came from different backgrounds, and who each thought that the other wasn't able to put duty first. The difference lay in what they viewed as their duty. Otherwise, both stallions were actually remarkably similar, and like a pair of positive magnets, they repelled. But that was only on the personal level. On a professional level, they kept things civil and followed their orders which came from the highest powers in the land. However, their professionalism did not reflect the attitude of their respective guard forces, and the reason they didn't get on had little in similarity to being two of the same magnets. Captain Shining Armor had stayed late for this meeting. Captain Nighthawk had come in early for this meeting, and the IS&D were simply here for this meeting. Not that either captain would have been alone anyway, of course, because both had a number of aides and other officers they had dragged into the meeting room too. The optimistic among them thought this was a sign of the meeting's importance. The pessimistic thought it was because misery loves company. That concludes the last of the minor nighttime incident reports. Starwing finished, letting the pages on his clipboard fall back down. Part of the purpose of this meeting had been to correlate any confirmed disturbance reports between both guard forces. Not something that usually needed to be done in person, as there was already a reporting chain in place to handle it, but with the last few days having been what they were, these were unusual times. Post-crisis, both Shining Armor and Nighthawk felt the need to keep their hoof on the pulse. Hence, holding this meeting. Nighthawk nodded in curt thanks to the lieutenant.
That was all. No signs of lingering chaos further abroad. No more reports of minor rioting and looting. Nothing else that the Night Guard can't deal with ourselves.
If you were watching, you might have seen some frustrated or irritated eye rolls among the tired Royal Guard officers brought along to this meeting. Everyone gathered around the meeting table was tired. It could easily be seen in any one of their postures and drooping eyes. It had been a long few days post-Discord. Tempers were short, and it was something of a minor miracle that there hadn't been a fight yet between the ranks of the Knight and Royal Guards. Across the table from the Thestral captain, Shining Armor nodded slightly. And I don't suppose anything has come to light regarding Graphonia's sudden border closure? He spoke clearly and briskly, without anything to suggest an accusation, yet Nighthawk still stared flatly back.
No, we know the same as you. Only what their embassy has declared.
Halflow's arrest was still a silent bone of contention between the two captains, especially as it was a secret as to how he'd ended up in equestrian custody. Even more so, now that Halflow had disappeared after Discord's rampage. Moving on, Shining Armor said after letting a significant pause elapse. There are ponies here with families to get home to or shifts to start. Cloudsdale sent the report in this afternoon. At least half of Equestria is back under full weather coverage and control. Roughly 30% of the rest is going to be dealt with in the next 2 days. And all but one weather tower will be back up and running within the next 3 days. Is this a guard issue, sir? Starrywing spoke up from beside Nighthawk. It was a fair question. Was this not the weather department's, department? The national weather was disturbed as a result of Discord, an issue of national security. Therefore, the weather recovery also falls under the guard's purview, Shining Armor's own lieutenant, Twinning Ivy, retorted. At least in part, Shining Armor added to be factual. Nighthawk grunted.
Is there a problem then? I'm assuming so, since you've bothered to bring it up when Cloudsdale is supposed to be dealing with it.
Shining Armor's cool expression seemed to say, Of course there's a problem, duh. Right back. It's the last 20% of Equestria which isn't going to be covered in time we need to step in and protect.
Protect?
Nighthawk related the last words as a gruff question. Yes, protect. The farthest reaches of Equestria have been without weather control for a week already, only with what local Pegasi, if any, can scrounge up. All schedules and deliveries no longer exist. Being out on the edge of the country also makes this last 20% the biggest workload. Simply put, too many farming towns out there are teetering on the edge of drought. And the 3 days until the weather towers are all up to speed again, assuming everything goes smoothly, will be too late. So it falls to the guard to aim them in putting right the last of Discord's after effects. The night guard in the room didn't seem quite as moved as the royal guards were by the news of this impending disaster. Beyond the border, the Thestral clans had lived with untamed weather just fine. It wasn't that they hadn't done some small-time weather control around their caves, but that had been nothing but small-time dabbling. It takes decades to subdue natural weather patterns, constant maintenance, and much more work and many more hooves than the Thestral clans had even if combined. Small-time weather stuff was one thing, but when a storm came, the clans had to simply bunker down and ride it out, same as everyone else living outside of Equestria. But they were in Equestria right now. Ponies here, and especially the farmers, both expected and relied completely upon the cleverly scheduled weather to the exact day. It wasn't that the farmers were knowingly lazy, it was simply that they had never had to not do it before. Simple as that.
We don't have any Thestrals to spare,
Nighthawk stated bluntly.
1 squad, perhaps 2 at most. That won't be enough to fill in for the down weather towers.
Make it 3, Nighthawk. I'll be committing 8 full Royal Guard Pegasi squads, which is already more than Canterlot can afford at this time, truth be told. Shield Basher's done the math. We need at least 3 more flying squads, Shining Armor answered back. Nighthawk stared flatly back while the other Night Guard shifted in irritation. Nighthawk hadn't said 1 squad, 2 max, to be conservative. He had said exactly the number he meant. He wasn't here to bandy words or be pushed. However, Shining Armor had meant exactly what he had meant too. Looking at the coverage, 11 squads was the bare minimum needed, or otherwise they might as well not bother. Neither captain was in the wrong here, but it was precisely this and reasons like it why the two disliked each other so much. Unfortunately, this spilled over to their subordinates too, who saw their boss's stance and copied it. To the side, the 3 previously quiet members of the IS&D had largely been ignored, as they had been contributing nothing. Now though, Crimson nudged his sergeant with a wing, muttering a few words in his ear. "If I might field a suggestion, sir," Gloom spoke up. The royal guards turned to look at him, but Nighthawk had already sharply nodded for him to go ahead. "Captain Shining Armor, you might have already considered this, but what about giving this task to the Wonderbirds?" "The who?" Twining Ivy blinked. The Wonderbolts, I mean," Gloom hastily corrected himself. "They're an extension of the military, and so could be given the task. They're an exclusive Pegasi-only group. They'd be perfect to get around to these far places." Starwing didn't seem to be able to stop himself from tacking on, "especially since they pride themselves so much on speed, from what I've been told." A Royal Guard Pegasus with sergeant rank pins on his shoulder looked deeply offended, even outraged at the suggestion of debasing the famous flying squad by relegating them to that, but he was smart enough not to voice his objections solely on that basis. Shining Armor was shaking his head to Crimson's suggestion through Gloom. "No, that's not going to work." Nighthawk shifted forwards, leaning slightly on the table. "Why not?" Shining Armor raised one brow back. "Because I've already included them in the calculation and passed down the orders for them to take part. We need an additional 11 squads plus them." The Pegasus sergeant's face, which had been shifting into vindicated, fell again as it turned out his own captain had already thought and approved of the idea. Nighthawk shifted back again. "All right then." If one had been watching Crimson closely after Shining Armor's explanation, and had also known how to read the laconic Pegasus, they might have spotted the way he resettled his feathers in some mild, smug satisfaction. You have needed to be someone in the know to have known why, though. Crimson had a very low opinion of the prideful Wonderbolts, which had lowered further when they had kept trying to get him to take their tryout because he was wasted in the Night Guard. Not in those words, of course, but that was how Crimson had understood them nevertheless. Small mercies. The inter-guard meeting was pretty much done after that. It had been approaching the end already, with all the important topics, or in some cases arguably unimportant, having been aired and addressed already. The Royal Guards who had to stay late for this meeting could finally leave. Meanwhile, the Night Guard who had come in early needed to go and start their shifts, putting them already behind schedule for the rest of the night. The Royal Guards filed swiftly out of the meeting room door, the Thestrals waiting for them all to exit first. Starwing sighed and rubbed at his face with the back of one wing claw, commenting to Craghill, "At least the elements of harmony didn't reset the whole of Equestria's weather to a natural, normal at the same time they destroyed Discord. I don't even want to imagine the fallout that would have caused." Captain Shining Armor had been one of the last Royal Guards to leave the room, and happened to be striding past on this side of the table as Lieutenant Starwing was saying that. The tall stallion's ear swiveled as he looked over sharply, eyes scanning until he identified the pony who had been speaking. Starwing blinked and lowered his wing claw. "Yes, sir?" he asked, nonplussed but not overly bothered by the captain's attention. The unicorn stallion was tall, with the air of command and a strong gaze, but honestly, how was he supposed to try and compete with Nighthawk's own stare? On the other hoof, a point in Shining Armor's favor was that he could at least look the Thestrals in the eye. Ponies who could were sadly few in number, even in the guard. Shining Armor's frown cleared, and he shook off whatever it had been. "Nothing. Carry on. I for one am just glad the elements didn't decide my country needed all bread replaced with books and all bakeries with libraries. Let them read books and not eat cake indeed." He finished with a tired chuckle as he left. Starrywing's ears tilted to the side, knowing he was obviously missing something in the joke. His companion Craghill simply shrugged too, so they let the strange joke pass and took the opportunity now that the doorway was clear to leave and get to work too. Nighthawk had already risen from the table, but he didn't follow his subordinates out yet. "Sergeant Gloom, a word with your squad," the captain called, signaling the IS&D to remain behind. Gloom, Crimson, and Prey, who'd been looking at Captain Shining Armor following his strange joke with an unusually intent look on his face, all turned and came to attention. "Yes, sir!" With a gruff jerk of his head to the side, Nighthawk signaled them to be quiet until it was just them left. Starrywing, seeing his captain's want for privacy, closed the door behind him as he left. Nighthawk's sharp yellow eyes flicked over Gloom and Crimson's expressions. No doubt Nighthawk saw the brighter eyes there, the perked ears, the remnants of recent smiles. So completely opposite from just one day ago, and he finished by letting his focus come to settle on the IS&D's last member and whose return was the reason for this happy change. For a brief moment, the captain let himself smile back fully without reserve overbearing his fangs. A rare display of unguarded emotion from the hard Thestral, and even rarer, a happy one at that. But it was only for that one moment. I thank Luna that you're back safely, Prey, as do many ponies, Nighthawk rasped. On one side of the lamb in question, Gloom nodded his helmeted head vigorously with feeling, and on the other, Crimson stole a quick look down at his smaller friend, as if just to check he was still there. The two of them were happy, but from the suddenly guarded look in Prey's blue eyes, he was sensing bad news coming. And it was. Nighthawk's face twisted down into another uncommon display of emotion, but this one not quite so rare. His fangs showed in a near sneer as he spat out the rest of his distasteful news. Some ponies, however, are not worth the star they are born under. I was honestly astonished at the new low and lack of compassion I was exposed to last night. And moreover, they found time to do so during all of this. It beggars belief. Such a petty-minded, honorless coward not worth carrying on their family name I have scarce had the displeasure of meeting. That strongly worded of a clan curse, coming from their gruff captain, had Gloom and Crimson standing stiff in wide-eyed alarm. Nighthawk didn't beat about the bush any more than that. Your probation officer has submitted a declaration for a full court hearing. Prey, his excuse? The 3 days you were missing after discords he's counting as a gross violation of all your restrictions. Gloom and Crimson stared. Prey stared. Nighthawk stared back, perfectly in tune with what they were feeling. Gloom brought up a wing claw and scratched disbelievingly at his ear. Sir, did you just say? Yes. Crimson was slowly shaking his head in stunned wonderment at the sheer audacity of what he had just heard.
Is this officer actually serious?
Yes. The Lamb of the Hour was the last to voice his utter disbelief.
Discord! I was gone because of Discord! The same thing that upended the whole country! What does he think? How? Just what? Is he an idiot?
Nighthawk snorted. Yes. Sir, this is beyond ridiculous. No pony can honestly believe that. It's already received preliminary court approval, Nighthawk growled. I don't know how. I don't know when. Something is rotten. The process was rushed through and signed off immediately. Some pony is trying to play games, but it's all legal.
There's no way Safety Hazard can honestly expect this to stand,
Prey insisted.
What kind of small court judge won't look at the facts and throw the case out the window immediately? Wait, this is part of why you said it smells rotten, right, sir? Because you think this whole thing is a setup between them all.
Yes, Nighthawk said again. But we're the Night God, Gloom exclaimed. He waved a hoof around wildly. This has got to be illegal. Princess Luna won't stand for this. Do they actually believe they'll win this? Prey was the one who answered first, brows narrowed.
Maybe they don't. Maybe that's not what they want. They want a hearing, or to escalate this, or to expose it to public light, or make a mark on my record to leverage later, or something else entirely.
My thoughts exactly.
What? On what grounds are they even basing this accusation?
Crimson asked, still utterly flabbergasted. Apparently, that Prey willingly fled Canterlot after Discord. Oh, that is just road apples! I'm sorry, sir, but it is! Gloom snorted. Yes, their excuse is that since every other pony in the city was restored afterwards, because you weren't in the city, it meant you tried to run away, Prey. That's just unlucky coincidence! It's also a lie! Prey's back now anyway! He came straight back! Gloom protested. I know, Nighthawk repeated, but they insisted. Said it was proof, since every pony was accounted for afterwards, that Discord wasn't the reason why.
That's not true. There's Halflow. He vanished too.
Crimson hastily added as he remembered. Prey looked up at Crimson's words.
Yes, that's right. Hang on, sir.
He spun back to Nighthawk, a grin growing on his face.
Was that what they said exactly? They said it was proof because every pony else had been restored.
Everyone else immediately caught on. Nighthawk thought back for a moment. Yes, that was their words, in writing. And we have an example of a griffin who was in Canterlot at the same time who also vanished, Gloom eagerly put in.
So we have proof,
Crimson finished. The lamb between them smiled nastily.
I just love loopholes. Ha! Every pony, not everybody. Oh, the irony. Take that!
Will that work, though? Will a technicality be enough? Gloom's still worried. Nighthawk grunted. We'll make it enough. They've started this on a technicality, and I'll have Starry Wing shut them down on a technicality. That was not how the uncompromising captain usually operated at all. He was the Thestral of duty before all else, as were all the Night Guard, and to them that meant upholding the spirit of the law just as much as the letter. But here, Nighthawk obviously thought he was upholding the spirit of the law. It was this safety hazard and others who were trying to twist the letter of the law, so Nighthawk saw no problem with throwing their summons back out the door. Even if it was just stalling, and they filed another hearing summons, so what? Obviously, they are trying to hide something here, evidenced by how they had tried to rush it through. Telling them to get stuffed was sending them a message that they weren't going to be able to slip this under the table. Although, what under the moon they could hope to achieve by attacking a lamb with no family or home in Canterlot, Nighthawk hadn't a clue. Plus, if they came back and tried a second time, they'd also be exposing themselves a second time to getting caught out on whatever they were really trying to do. This wasn't just about prey. It was also an indirect attack on the Night Guard's good name, and therefore, more importantly, Princess Luna's name by extension. The Night Guard had been refusing to respond to all slander and often blatant provocation so far, whether by nobles, royal guards, the public, newspapers, or government bodies. Not only was it beneath them, but because it would also only escalate things into a battle of public opinion they wouldn't win, no matter how untruthful the lies were. Within the Night Guard, Nighthawk's legal power and authority was near absolute. Outside of the Guard, however, he actually had little power over anything which wasn't against the law, or didn't constitute a threat to the equestrian citizens. Like a governmental hearing summons that was to prey, and not private prey of the Night Guard. But this unexpected solution to a deeply offensive problem, and one which looked like it would work perfectly too, it was a welcome change. Perfect. This cowardly legal attack had come out of nowhere, but just like that, and with some quick thinking, they had found a solution. The hot anger which had flared up all around turned into smug satisfaction as the four of them exchanged looks all around. Finally, for once, something in life which wasn't needlessly complicated. An easy win, a quick solution, a simple fix. It felt a lot like finding a solid gold 4-leaf clover when you went to empty the bins. Surely this must be some lingering good fortune left in the air by the elements of harmony or some such. Good things didn't just happen to the ISND otherwise. But it was about time some of that luck they had been hearing so much about ended up on their side. Gloom rolled his neck and relaxed, tufted ears going up from laying rigidly back. What's that pertinent Earth Pony saying? You reap what you sow.
Too right, sir.
Prey chimed in, still with that grin, which would have simply looked cute to anyone who didn't actually know the lamb, but was also a little out of character. But then again, being vindictive was in Prey's character. Crimson flicked his wing, as if flicking the irritation and disgust off like water.
This was utterly stupid. I'm glad it has come to a stupid end.
Awkwardly worded, but the Pegaside's meaning was understood by all. A fitting resolution. They have wasted enough valuable Night Guard time already. They shan't waste any more. Back to being able to do our real duty, Nighthawk stated. Yes, sir, and gladly. Good. All dismissed. Nighthawk nodded gruffly to the ISND. Yes, sir! Time marched on and duty waited for no pony. The captain pulled open the door, turning back for a moment on an afterthought. Her Majesty was glad to hear of your return too, Prey. Night watch over you all. The lamb just kept smiling away. I'm not saying I only missed you because you had touch with paperwork, but I'm not gonna lie and say how having you help again isn't gonna be a lifesaver. Gloom joked as he showed Prey the huge stack of papers and files which had mounted on the desk even only after 3 days. The lamb looked up from staring at the virtual mountain of paper to stare at the sergeant instead.
What? Why would you say that?
Gloom quirked one brow under his helmet. Because you're good at the admin paperwork side?
Of course I am. Allow me to rephrase. What I meant was, why would you do this to me? I returned early from enjoying my holiday, and this is how you repay me?
He pressed a hoof to his chest in mock hurt. Gloom laughed as Crimson came through the door with yet another near-to-burstlings folder.
Yes. Welcome back, Prey.
The lamb tissed and made his way over to the desk, pulling off some of the lower papers he could reach. He didn't make a start on the paperwork, just poked around and flicked through them all first to get his bearings.
Well, fill me in on what you've done so far and where you are. It'll make it easier to catch up.
Prey said, looking up as Crimson and Gloom came over to get stuck in. With Prey back, even the prospect of a long, hoof-cramping day spent trapped here on the dusty office didn't sound so bad, as long as it was the three of them doing it together. Can do, Gloom nodded, searching for where the inkwell had ended up. And not that you were worrying, but don't worry. That wasn't your welcome back present. That's after work. Cotton and Scenic have asked us three to come around. They want to properly welcome you back, too. Prey looked up with a complicated look on his face, but Gloom beat him to it. It's just going to be a small thing, don't worry. But they were really worried, too. They deserved a chance to welcome you back as well. He forestalled Prey, finding even the lamp's unfriendly attitude nostalgic at the moment.
No, that's fine. Really, I felt I should see them too.
Prey hastily waved it aside with the grip of pages in his cleft hoof. That is good to hear, Gloom said, adding an approving nod to the white lamb. Gloom really hadn't noticed until it was gone how much the blue ribbon had been a part of his image of Prey. Like a person who had worn glasses for as long as you'd known them. When they took them off, he really looked odd. I think he wore that very ribbon in Mayflower, the thought came to Gloom. He pushed that away, not wanting to taint the mood. A day of hard work lay ahead of them, but it was honest, if obscenely aggravating work. Right, let's get you up to speed, Prey. Do you remember where I left the blue folder on the cards, Crimson? Under this one? Thanks. Okay, so here's what's going on so far. As Gloom explained, it wasn't just the IS&D who were buried under paperwork at the moment. Currently, all of the Night Guard was generating paperwork and reports at double pace as they frantically sought to establish checks and controls again in Discord's wake. Crimson took over the explanation without stopping his scribbling away at a report he wasn't even sure he was supposed to be filed with the Night Guard instead of the Royal Guard, but going back to ask about would waste more time than just doing it. As Crimson rather bluntly put it, everything had been given to the Guard to double-check it was still working. Not just out of the rapidly diminishing fear that somehow Discord's chaos magic was still lingering, because so far nobody had found anything the elements of harmony hadn't fixed, but because it was entirely likely for the thing in question to have broken down or become overwhelmed in the rush after Discord. Take the toll bridges as one example. No pony had been running them during the time of the Chaos Apocalypse, obviously, but afterwards when the bridge keepers returned, the days without maintenance and oversight had led to some damage, and one of the cash tills in a toll booth had been broken open and emptied. The latter was obviously a crime, so a report had to be logged and filed properly. But what about getting the toll bridges repaired before anything more serious could go wrong? Obviously, that wasn't the Night Guard's job. They weren't repair ponies. But due to the huge crunch the whole government was under at the moment, it had somehow ended up with them being responsible for making sure the report got to the right place so someone could be sent out to fix the damage. And that was just one example. There were plenty more in the stacks of files and paperwork to get through. Toot! Toot toot! What are you saying, Toot? Lily asked, askance. Cynic pointed to his mare friend beside him, who smiled sheepishly. Well, the party hooters I got turned out to be rubbish. They don't actually work, see? So saying, the huge mare blew into her party hooter for them all to see. The colorful paper flopped about and let out a very faint wheeze, and that was it.
I am slightly lost,
Crimson blankly admitted.
What is the purpose of that?
Nothing. They're just supposed to be fun and blown at parties and celebrations.
Carton Juice frowned down at the sad party hooter laying limply at her hoof.
Darn it. I always wanted to be a part of a triumphant return where we used them.
Another little dream crushed by reality, Lily muttered, fumbling the party cone hat she'd been wearing off her head now that they were inside.
I don't think of this as a triumphant anything. It just is. I'm back, that's all,
Prey said as they filed into the living room. There was a tray of large frosted cupcakes on the table.
Nonsense. This is totally a triumphant return,
Carton disagreed jokingly.
It's too bad Saffron couldn't be here today for this.
Thank you for inviting us, Gloom said politely, pulling off the waistcoat he had been using to cover the scar tissue on his chest, the article of clothing having been the hearth-warming gift of the missing mare in question herself.
Oh, it's no bother. Not a bother at all,
Carton beamed, helping Lily down onto a floor cushion, which the smaller mare grunted and accepted. Well, everyone was smaller when compared to the giantess of an earth pony. And it's only right that we do something, even if it's just small, like, this thing we're doing, really. Scenic shrugged, waving vaguely around the room.
Small is fine. Better, actually,
Prey politely said.
I can't say I'm a fan of needless pomp.
But don't you all work at the Royal Palace? Carton asked, looking up.
Precisely,
Prey said at the exact same time as Crimson said, That's exactly why. Gloom nodded his firm agreement, folding up his scarf between both wing claws. Without wanting to stereotype, nobles can be just as bad as all those stories make them out to be. Not that we have much to do with them, think Luna. But still, you get the point. Lord Vanish of House Time, Crimson intoned, voice utterly neutral. Carton Juice didn't know what that was referring to, and looked first to Scenic, who winced and made a hushing motion, glancing quickly at Crimson. That guy was, let's not spoil the mood. Prey was poking around for a floor cushion of his own, the others doing the same as Carton bade them all be seated. He was the lamb of the hour, but he was acting rather passive about it, just going along with the whole thing. It was a lot politer than showing his mild annoyance with the party thing, as Gloom was sure Prey was really feeling, so that was good. Right then, let's get to it, Carton Juice announced. Who wants a vanilla cupcake, and who wants a chocolate one? I never got the whole thing of waiting until the end of the party to have cake. You should start with the cake right at the beginning, so who wants what? How far the skittish giantess of an earth pony had come. How far they had all come. There had been a time when Carton had been scared of Gloom and Crimson, even out of armor, with their weapons, yellow eyes, and scars. Not that she'd ever let herself be repulsed by Lily's gruesome appearance, but the difference there had been a tragic accident versus the unknown. Although, being honest, Carton still couldn't maintain eye contact with either yellow-eyed night guard, but that was all. Very soon, all served with a massive cupcake each of which could easily be an entire meal all by itself, everyone was settled and making small talk. Crimson, seeing Prey nibbling at his vanilla cupcake, knew the lamb must have checked for poison and bit into his own. Not that Carton would try to poison a fly, but that waiter at the Green Cockatrice hadn't meant to poison them either, but she'd ended up being the unwitting server. Although, here inside this private house, with the cupcakes homemade and still warm, that chance had been vanishingly small to begin with anyway. It was just something that once it had happened to you, you could never forget. Carton asked Crimson whether if it was true that the floors in the palace were paved with gold, something that she'd always wondered about, but somehow had never gotten around to taking one of the day tours. To which Crimson answered, no, because people walk on the floors and that would make a lot of cleaning. Gold went on the walls and ceiling. Gloom commented in passing to Scenic about the gap there had been in communication with sending letters back to the clan, again caused by Discord, and how glad he was that they'd finally gotten the first delayed letter through. They'd been starting to get worried. It was around about then that Lily shared a bit of news of her own. Her meldwood leg stuck out straight to the left from atop the floor cushion, while she laid there on her right side. The more I try to reconnect with my brother, he's Tallow in case you've forgotten, the more I think stupid runs in the family. Don't put yourself down like that. You're far from stupid, Carton gently chided. What's happened? Lily snorted ungracefully, muttering something in private disagreement, before she answered. The idiot came around my flat to complain to me, about how unfair life was. Like it's my fault his fiancé's put their engagement on hold and doesn't want to see him. You know how he got Discord touched? No? Well, anyway, he did. And he doesn't remember what he did, but apparently she does. Lily snorted again, vexed. But what really gets me is he keeps saying, oh, I don't remember, so it can't be my fault. Why doesn't she want to see me anymore? Hypocritical idiots as thick as a plank of something that's really thick and dense. Because he's that. Oh, I'm sorry that happened, Lily. I can see how that might be. Carton weakly tried to comfort her. Lily grumbled something, looking at the floor then away. It's fine, but it just made me so angry. It's okay. I would probably be angry too if some pony... No, not that. We mean, yeah, that too. But that's not why. But because... Lily broke off in a loud sigh of exasperation. But because I did feel sort of sorry for him. Because I felt bad that something bad had happened to him. Even if it's stupid. And they're both being stupid. And they'll get back together and be stupid together again. But for some stupid reason I got angry because it's not. He isn't. It's not his fault he's stupid and doesn't. It was only then that the disfigured mare belatedly realized that everyone else had stopped to listen, and that it wasn't just Carton she'd been addressing. It isn't his fault he doesn't realize how lucky he is, how good he's got it. It was Scenic, of all people, who quietly suggested the end of Lily's sentence. The stallion stared down fixedly at his own front hooves, resting before him. And that somehow Discord doesn't seem to have stuck in any pony's mind and somehow hasn't made a lasting impact? Gloom voiced his own suggestion, tone serious.
Or that he wasn't there with the 5 of us in Mayflower,
Crimson stated. Perched atop his own floor cushion, it almost large enough to function as a mattress for his runt frame, Prey just nodded along with Crimson's words. It was only Cart and Juice who didn't understand. Couldn't understand. But she stayed quiet, at least understanding what she didn't understand. Lily looked around, then averted her head, although the roots growing out of the side of her face were still visible. Yeah, pretty much all of that, Lily agreed glumly. The lamb looked around the room as the emotional tone of the conversation shifted downwards. With a show of a rueful, put-on smile, he set aside his half-finished cupcake and sat up straighter on his cushion.
Hey, if it's as stupid and silly as you say, Lily, then it's really not your problem to solve. It'll sort itself out in the end, and since this is Canterlot, it'll probably be a happy ending too. And besides, you know the truth deep down.
What truth? Lily challenged, eager but also wary. She'd learned from experience what Prey could say. The lamb shrugged easily.
Nothing serious has happened to your brother. His petty worries seriously tick you off, but here's the question. If it was in your power, would you want your brother to endure even a tenth of what you did?
No, of course I don't, Lily immediately denied.
Then congratulations.
Prey sat back, smiling brightly as he finally got to his point, a mix of smug, uncaring, yet so sincere.
You can know that you're a good person. And you know what the rest of us have all felt and thought before. You're not alone in this.
Prey, Crimson, Gloom, and Scenic. Lily looked around at the IS&D, both current and old members, and got what the little lamb meant. She had suffered, and while in the heat of the moment she might darkly wish someone else would suffer too, she didn't actually mean it. And what was more, Lily knew she didn't mean it. It was liberating in a way, as proof that at least one positive thing had come out of all this. She now knew what it was to wish not the worst, but rather the best on someone. And wasn't that a nice thought? One which she could save and revisit again and again when she was feeling down. It was an unexpectedly nice thing for Prey to say, and it certainly lifted the mood and got the small talk back on track. Well, small talk for them. Carton munched down on her second huge cupcake, which was actually probably a normal size to her. The topic of the strained weather schedule came up, the usual substanceless griping, and Gloom put in that they actually had it good compared to the rest of the country at the moment, what with Cloudsdale only floating a mile or so from Canterlot. Through it, though, Scenic kept looking at Prey, going to say something, then shaking his head and letting it go. However, a minute later, he'd end up repeating the little performance again. Finally, Scenic worked up his courage, or perhaps his nerve, and got up. He walked over to Prey and ducked his head to quietly ask, "Hey, Prey, can I talk to you out the back for a minute?" The lamb gave him the side-eye.
About?
Some stuff. Private stuff.
I guess I'm the guest here, so all right,
Prey said, rising off the floor cushion without hesitation. Prey brushed some scattered cake crumbs off his wool.
After you.
Scenic led the way out into the kitchen, the drying rack by the sink still filled with the washed-up baking tray and cupcake mixing utensils. You want some water first? Scenic asked, fishing in the cupboard for a glass himself. He was stalling.
I'm not thirsty, thanks.
Scenic poured himself a drink from the tap, drained it, then set the glass upside down in the sink. More stalling. Finally, he turned around to look at the patiently waiting lamb in the eyes. I wanted to ask a favor, or for advice. I need help with something. He winced as Prey smiled attentively, blinking big blue eyes inquisitively.
Well, don't beat around the bush. What is it?
Scenic was certain Prey was subtly mocking him. Maybe because the runt lamb already knew what he was trying to ask. If he was, then that was probably fair. Gathering his courage, Scenic took the plunge. After Discord was gone and everything went back to normal, it was just... Do you know ponies don't seem to remember? It was only a few days ago, but they don't remember it properly. But I do. I don't know why, but I can. And you know what I remember? Being helpless. Being powerless. Being nothing. Scenic started fidgeting, needing to move and unable to help himself. I did nothing. And if Discord comes back, I won't be able to do anything again. I don't like that. I don't want that. It's not fair that I can't do anything. What if Carton gets hurt? What if she gets it doesn't come back? It was like Mayflower. Not exactly, but different. Prey stood just listening, waiting. Scenic was a coward. He had thought he was being brave, that doing the right thing made him a brave hero. He had been so relieved to find out he was a good pony, that he wouldn't kill. He'd been so proud of himself. And now he was still a coward, because he didn't want to kill. He couldn't, and wouldn't do it. Even if someone like him could have killed Discord, could have stopped him, even to save himself, he wouldn't do it. And yet, when he thought about it being Carton on the line instead of his own life, yet even then he still couldn't do it. If someone held a knife to Carton's neck and told Scenic to kill someone or she'd die, just no. It was too horrible to even think about. But he had thought about it. He had thought about the sick humor of Discord and what could have happened, and the harsh lesson he had finally learnt. The lesson that there would always be a next time. And what if there was no pony? No elements of harmony or gloom, Prey and Crimson to step in and save him next time. To save his dear, sweet, innocent Carton Juice. This was why Scenic called himself a coward. Because he wouldn't be able to do it. But he was not above asking someone else to do it for him instead. So he could keep his hooves clean. Scenic hated himself for that. And he was also disgusted with himself that he was still asking. Prey, what I want is something to help me, us. If some pony like Discord came again, or like Hard Baked, or a Kinder Snatch, I want, can you please? Scenic couldn't get the words out. He jerkily nodded to the side where the cutting board lay. There, on the wall along with an array of other metal serving spoons and tongs, was the wickedly sharp kitchen knife Prey had given him for housewarming. The knife that Scenic couldn't shake the small feeling every time he used it that maybe, just maybe, Prey had given it to him for another reason entirely. Can you help me with, I don't even know, something that could, if it came down to it, if Carton was in danger? Scenic gulped. Can you? Please, Prey. I know what I'm asking, but please. Over the course of Scenic's request, the lamb's face had slowly shifted. Now, as Scenic waited in silence, holding his breath, Prey tapped a hoof thoughtfully against his chin. Scenic realized he hadn't asked why Prey wasn't wearing his blue ribbon, as usually he'd be tugging on that instead.
So you want something that will protect you and the mare you love?
I do. Please.
But you don't want me to just give you a sword and be done with it, because you don't want to have to lift the sword in self-defense either, right?
Scenic stared at the floor, unable to look the small lamb in the eye.
Well, you have a point in that having a sword is worse than useless against the dangers you're talking about,
the lamb hummed. Yes, that's true, Scenic breathed out.
So you want something else, something more, but you don't want to know the fine details, or the cost. Have I got everything right?
I mean, if it's going to cost bits, then of course I would pay.
Don't play dumb, Paint Spot. You know that's not what I meant by that. But I have good news for you, because something does actually come to mind.
He grinned as Scenic looked up in hope.
Yes, I've got the perfect thing in mind, actually.
His grin grew wider.
Something to sit in the home you love, around the people you love, out of the way where you won't even need to look at it if you don't want to. Yes, I've got something for you.
Scenic worked his tongue around his dry mouth. Okay. That sounds, great. What is it?
Don't worry about that. You'll see it when it gets here.
Prey waved that aside, trotting for the kitchen door. That did not fill Scenic with confidence. The exact opposite. He hadn't liked the sound of all that, but he was the one who had asked, he reminded himself as he trotted out after Prey back into the living room. He wondered what it would be. He couldn't think up anything that would do what Prey had said. It was to Scenic's great surprise and alarm, when only 40 minutes later, after they had rejoined the small party and things were winding down, that Prey came up to him again, that grin back in place.
Congratulations! You've got a delivery. It's out back.
What? You mean now? Already? But how? What? But the lamb was already trotting for the back door, forcing Scenic to follow if he wanted to get an answer. Pray, what is it? Seriously? Scenic hissed as he hurried after, anxious not to be overheard by Carton. Prey reached up and flicked back the deadbolt on the back door and pushed it open. He turned with a strange, bright smile in place.
See for yourself.
On the back step, there was a large, gray, featureless box. Scenic looked all around, trying to see who had brought it, even remembering to look up at the sky for a flyer. Nothing, and no one. Just the plain box. It looked like it was some kind of heavy wooden paneling. It was just a bit too awkwardly large to get it onto your back to carry, with no handles to lift it with either, just a firmly shut lid on top. Scenic cautiously stepped closer. Yes, it was made out of some kind of dull gray wood. It was large enough that maybe if it was empty, someone small could contort themselves to squash inside. Prey popped up beside the box and slammed a hoof down on the lid.
It's a jack-in-the-box.
On his hoof hitting the lid, it sprang open. Scenic yelped and jerked backwards as the jack-in-the-box launched outwards. Holy Celestia! Don't do that, Prey! Scenic clutched at his hammering heart. The jack-in-the-box bounced back and forth on its spring. It was a colorful jester-style doll, a huge red smile and bells tinkling on its cap. Even though anyone could obviously see it was cloth and wood, Scenic really didn't like how it was the size of a colt. Tinkle, tinkle went the bells as the jack-in-the-box finally finished bouncing back and forth and came to a stop, flopped over to one side. At least it didn't try to stare into his soul with its googly eyes, Scenic admitted. He couldn't see the mechanism in the box, a concertinaed polka dot cloth covering that and the large spring. Still smiling, Prey reached around and flipped the heavy wooden lid back up. The jack-in-the-box folded itself away with a clicking of gears as the lid thunked shut. Scenic blinked as he was left with just the large gray box in front of him on the step. The gray wood was utterly plain and unadorned, even though Scenic felt that it was somehow misleading. Prey, Just what?
It's for you, as I said. Love it and keep it safe.
Is this some kind of joke? Scenic couldn't help but ask, turning his disbelieving stare to the lamb. The lamb's smile vanished.
I believe a thank you is what you're looking for.
Thank you? But it's a jack-in-the-box? Prey's look was utterly deadpan. And does this jack-in-the-box, does it? Scenic trailed off, not sure what to even ask. The lamb didn't answer. He simply trotted past Scenic, who moved to get out of his way and back inside. Scenic was left with the box. He stared at it, and thank Celestia it didn't stare back. Jack-in-the-box? He asked to no one. After a while, he dragged the box inside and moved it into his spare room. It was really heavy for a box of its size, wood or no wood. Was it filled with metal or something? Because it was nearly as heavy as a person. Scenic hurriedly covered it with a sheet and shut the spare bedroom door, and went back to rejoin everyone else. The small private party finished shortly thereafter, and everyone went their separate ways. And that was the story. Or part of a story. Scenic's story. Would it mean anything in the future? Probably not. That's how real life went. Some grand gestures weren't actually that grand or important when you looked back at them later. At the time, they certainly seemed important, but were they really? Only with hindsight would you ever know, and that might require years of patience. Of course, you might not need to wait years. You might not even need to wait weeks or months. You never knew what was going to happen tomorrow. Also, you might not realize it, but you might have made the wrong decision at the time. Which side of the coin did it fall on, and when would Scenic learn the result? Well, at least for one more night, Scenic wouldn't need to learn which it was. as the unyielding hoof of time hadn't advanced the clock that far just yet. The lamb's strange, oversized jack-in-the-box was put in Scenic's spare room, where the stallion hoped he would be able to forget about it by never needing to try to puzzle out what Prey's cryptic words meant. And being utterly honest, the idea of an oversized, unusually heavy jack-in-the-box, given to him by Prey of all people, unnerved Scenic. That, and he couldn't shake the suspicion that Prey was just having him on, and that it really was just an oversized jack-in-the-box, and nothing else. Prey was definitely the type to go in for subtle revenge in Scenic's opinion. But that was seen from the perspective of only one person, Scenic. Everyone had the story of their own life ongoing too. Everyone did. Just taking those who had been invited to that little celebration tonight for Prey's safe return, for example. Lily, a unicorn cripple, who nevertheless was reaching out and being dragged into her older brother's drama. Saffron Swirl, who hadn't even been able to attend because of being busy with other demands elsewhere in her life. Gloom, who had shared a few non-sensitive stories about what life was like back in the clans. Crimson, who didn't share any stories about his clan and his life before coming to Canterlot. Carton Juice, mare friend to Scenic, and someone who was just a normal citizen, and therefore had a unique perspective that all the rest of them lacked about Canterlot. And that was just one example of one normal house within the massive Golden City, filled with rich history, events, and individuals. That was how life worked. There was always so much going on beneath the surface in all walks of life, all the time. And Prey, the only sheep, the one who had disappeared and had just as mysteriously returned, what about him? The runt lamb with his white wool, soft blue eyes, and an innocent smile. What about him indeed? Everyone in the know already knew the odd lamb wasn't all he said he was. It was what made Prey, Prey. Or they thought they knew. Alone. Finally. Back at the apartment block, up on the second floor, in the hallway split between Prey and Crimson's flats. One door with a brass tag reading 31A, and the other 31B. And alone, with no one to see. The lamb wore no smile now. No expression at all, actually. They blinked. The door into the flat was suddenly wide open. The illusion of the solid door which had been sitting in the doorway had vanished, showing it had really been open all along. The lamb looked up. There was a pony standing inside, safely inside the doorway. It was a pink mare, thin, tall, an unnaturally sharp and curved horn upon her brow. Her tricolored mane hung utterly straight, and as unmoving as the mare standing there, and her deep indigo eyes were as cold and dead as an angler's shark's. Outside of the door, the lamb blinked. Oh! A drawing of breath, that moment in between. I was waiting for you to arrive, the mare said. She reached a hoof up and pulled something out from an inner pocket of her travel cloak. She didn't use her magic, but her hoof. And I have a gift for you. It's not as nice as the one you gave to me, but I hope it'll do. She held out her hoof. Draped across it was a blue ribbon. In the dim light, the silk looked strange. Freshly returned. It found me less than an hour ago. Just blew right into my mane, because it knew I would give it to you. The small lamb's eyes riveted on the ribbon. He reached out slowly to take it, and the ribbon twisted like a live thing and shot forwards. Prey took his ribbon back, the cool silk so familiar. With a swift, practiced move, he reached up and tied it behind his ear, where it belonged. In the back of his mind, the grinding, gnawing echoes settled back into place, where they also belonged. He raised an eyebrow at Lemon.
I have a gift for you,
He quoted back to her.
Was that a joke?
Yes, Prey, because you gave me this, and now I'm giving you that,
Lemon answered, reaching up to touch the electrite choker at her throat. She shrugged.
I thought it was appropriate to say, but not as funny as I thought it would be.
Prey raised his other brow. Funny?
Yes, Prey. I am aware I am ill-suited to humor, but it is an important trait in a society of ponies. Thus, I am trying to get better at it,
She informed him.
You should take lessons from Crimson,
Prey joked, before additionally qualifying,
Yes, that was a joke of my own. Also, thank you for bringing by the jack-in-the-box at such short notice,
Prey added, as he looked around his flat and breathed in deeply. He had stayed in Crimson's flat yesterday because he had wanted to, because they had both wanted the other two. But there was something to be said for stepping Hoof back into his own flat, and the safety all the runes inside it provided, of course.
It was no issue,
Lemon Pink said.
It was not as if we were not going to give it to Scenic right from the beginning.
True,
Prey acknowledged.
but I'm also making an effort to say thank you more, to try and be better. I was supposed to be getting better after Rushweed, after Nightmare Night. I told myself I would try.
Lemon inclined her head.
We both are. It is not easy.
No, it's not.
Prey sighed. He looked around his bare flat again.
Should we have not implanted the suggestion in Scenic's head then? To trick him into making the request?
Lemon asked into the quiet.
He was already thinking of asking. We just gave him a little push.
Prey tugged restlessly at the free end of his recently returned ribbon. It was so good to have it back. It was true. Scenic had been thinking of asking something along the lines of what he had already. He'd just been trying to get up the nerve.
Scenic is not Crimson,
Prey said out loud after properly lining up his thoughts to say what he meant.
He's not as important. None of them are. I am not prepared to risk anywhere near as much for them. And I'm also not prepared to be patient with them either. I won't wait for them to make such an important decision themselves.
People had free will, and they could choose. But in this, Prey decided he was choosing for them whether they liked it or not. Then afterwards, using mental suggestions to convince them they had made the choice themselves all along. It was wrong. It was arguably abhorrent. But so what? It was nothing new to Prey. He was doing this for him, so he wouldn't feel bad if something happened later. Or at least, make it hurt less. Because, as he had been lying there on the mountainside, turned into candy floss and trapped by mirrors, Prey had surprised himself by thinking of them. Gloom, Lily, Scenic, and the others. No one had been more surprised than Prey himself to realize he did care for them. Vaguely, selfishly, distantly, and nowhere near as much as Crimson, and then Gloom in second place, but he knew them now. He still despised their weakness, was infuriated by their pony-induced blindness in matters, often aggravated and annoyed by them, but he still knew them. It was possible to both like and hate someone at the same time. Prey knew that well. He hated himself, but he loved living.
I don't like them. I really don't. Scenic, Lily, Carton, and Saffron, I mean. Gloom's something else. But I do know them. Therefore, they are better than any other random racist pony off the street.
Prey summed up, repeating it out loud for himself. Lemon already knew all of this, because how could she not? Prey had shared it all with her on his return.
Yes, Prey.
He glanced sidelong at Lemon Pink.
You know, if you want to give Randy something yourself, then okay, I'll approve it.
I will think on it, Prey.
It is up to you. It's your decision to make as a person.
Yes, Prey. I do realize that, Prey.
Of course she did, because that was something else Prey had already discussed with her. She was simply repeating it again to drive the point home. It was time to move on. Prey's hoof rose up to play with the free end of his ribbon again, just so relieved to have it back. The old familiar motion was even more soothing than he had realized what he had been missing. He looked at Lemon and asked the important question. He already knew the answer, because if she had found anything, it would have been the first thing she had said, but he still double-checked.
You found no signs of the mimics, or rather the changelings, down in the caves, right?
Prey had to ask. It didn't matter, he already knew. He would be asking that same question for a long time to come. He was sure. At least Prey would never be cursed with the fear that someone he knew had been replaced with the disguised insectile equine, with grossly overgrown black fangs, and waiting to tear his throat out the moment he turned his back.
No, Prey. Within the tunnels we have claimed, no runes triggered, nor did I find any old tracks or signs with a manual inspection.
Lemon Pink paused there, but she wasn't finished with her report. Prey had to stop the instinctive breath of relief he let out as she continued with her near monotone.
Venturing outside of the bounds of the runic defenses, I found the burnt remains. Many burnt remains. I did not go any deeper. I did not need to.
Lemon hadn't needed to. The burnt and rotting remains were answered to the question already. There was no need for Lemon to risk pushing deeper into the dark tunnels filled with stale air and the old lingering stink of ash. If the brittle and burnt remains were still there, when they had gone to all that effort before to retrieve Shimmer's corpse back in Mayflower, it meant the mimics really had fled. They hadn't even tried to venture back into the tunnels to retrieve the evidence. They must have meant to retake it all at the same time when they meant to take the city by storm and swarm. An all-or-nothing gambit. That wasn't going to happen now, though. Their invasion wasn't going to happen at all. Maybe they'd try again in the future, build up their numbers again. But now, Prey was all but certain there weren't enough survivors to even try now. You couldn't forget the harshest lessons life ever taught you.